The jungle was too quiet. It was March 1973, somewhere deep in Vietnam's central highlands. Mist slithered between the massive trees like breath from something ancient. M16 rifles lay abandoned in the mud, their straps tangled in underbrush. Helmets sat upright, as if their owners had simply vanished mid-step. Boots were scattered, one of them still laced, soaked in red clay. A radio, half buried under a fallen rucksack, hissed with static, then crackled to life. "This is Bravo Company. We're under attack, something's here." The voice was panicked, breathless. "Repeat, this is Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 21st Infantry, we're surrounded." "It's not." A harsh burst of static cut the voice off, followed by a long, distorted scream that echoed unnaturally through the airwaves. The frequency dropped into silence. Then, just before the transmission died completely, another voice came through, whispered and ragged. "They are not human. They are." Static swallowed the rest. Suddenly, a low, guttural howl rang through the jungle, unlike any animal sound known to the region. It carried through the fog like a warning, then disappeared into the stillness. A Huey chopper passed overhead, its rotors chopping the mist apart. But down below, all was motionless. No bodies. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Just the eerie quiet of a jungle that should have been alive with birds, bugs, and heat. Instead, the air felt thick. Unnatural. Watching. Then the camera pans down, slow, deliberate. A single boot sits in the mud. Still tied. Still upright. And utterly alone. Where did Bravo Company go? The war left behind many ghosts, but this was different. This was a vanishing. Top Secret slams across the center in thick red letters. The folder creaks open, animated classified documents flash by in quick succession. Lines of text are blacked out with heavy strokes. Phrases bleed through. Unexplained loss. No survivors located. Anomalous phenomena. Then a voice cuts in, calm, precise, and bitter. For 50 years, the Pentagon buried the truth about Bravo Company. March 1973. 40 men from the 3rd Battalion, 21st Infantry, United States Army. Bravo Company was dispatched on what was labeled a routine patrol near the Cambodian border. Official records would later mark the mission as low risk. The unit never returned. For decades, the story was wrapped in bureaucracy, sealed in archives even senior officers could not access. The Army's explanation? A tragic ambush. A paperwork error. A logistical failure. But that lie began to unravel in 2023. That's when a series of declassified files, once buried in DARPA archives, were quietly leaked to a defense journalist. They didn't show a standard mission. They revealed deliberate deployment to a zone marked anomalously unstable. They included field recordings and sensor data that had been scrubbed from all combat logs. And they referenced voices in the jungle, ones that called soldiers by name. Then came the interview. Sergeant Daniel Hayes, now retired, sat before a single camera in a grey room, hands shaking as he spoke. "They didn't desert," he said, eyes locked forward. "Something took them. And the Army made sure we forgot." He'd been part of the search team. He'd seen the burnt-out gear, the missing dog tags, the claw marks in the soil. And he'd kept a copy of something the Army tried to erase. His words hung heavy. They said it was a war zone. But that wasn't war. That was something else. The question remained. Why was the incident sealed even from military archives for half a century? The jungle in Vietnam's central highlands had always carried a certain weight. Thick, wet, and dense with ancient trees, the valley near the Cambodian border was the kind of place locals passed by in silence. To the US Army, it was just another unnamed sector, a patch of land where intelligence said enemy communication towers might exist. But to the Montagnard tribes who lived nearby, it was something else entirely. They called it Thung Lng Bong T, the Shadow Valley. On March 15, 1973, 2 months after the signing of the Paris Peace Accords, most American forces were already preparing to withdraw. Peace was promised. Troops were going home. But not Bravo Company. They were given one final assignment. Captain John Merrill, 34, respected, and hardened by years in country, received sealed orders for a reconnaissance patrol into Shadow Valley. No explanation. Just coordinates. He wasn't one to ask questions. 40 men. Full loadout. M16 rifles, claymores, night vision scopes, and something else, something new. Their radios were not standard issue. Each unit was equipped with a prototype long-range system allegedly developed to pick up encrypted enemy chatter. But these radios had one glaring flaw: they reacted unpredictably in high magnetic areas. Still, orders were orders. Huey helicopters roared low over the treetops that morning, whipping mist from the jungle floor as they descended. Soldiers dropped into waist-high grass slick with dew, their boots sinking into soft mud. The jungle swallowed them instantly. Private First Class Thomas Ruiz, the company's youngest radio operator, felt it as soon as his boots hit the earth. It was too still, he recalled. No birds. No bugs. No smell of gunpowder or jungle rot. Just silence. Locals had tried to warn them. As Bravo Company prepped the night before, a Montagnard elder approached the perimeter fence. He said little, but his tone was grave. Through a translator, his message was clear. The forest there is not asleep. It watches. It remembers. Captain Merrill listened, nodded, and walked away. By 11 a.m., the unit was 2 clicks into the valley. Tree canopies blotted out the sun. Visibility dropped. The air grew thicker, damper. Vines clung to their gear like living hands. Ruiz tried to raise base command, but his radio gave nothing but static and occasional, clipped echoes of their own voices bouncing back. He rotated frequencies. Nothing. The terrain was unnatural. Paths twisted without warning. Compass needles began to drift. And soon, the trees began to repeat, as if the soldiers were walking in circles. Sergeant Daniel Hayes remembered the moment doubt crept in. We saw the same fallen log twice. Merrill marked it with his knife the first time. When we passed it again 20 minutes later, the mark was gone. Still, they pushed forward. By late afternoon, Bravo Company reached a rise overlooking a narrow gorge, a place where an old French listening post from the First Indochina War had once stood. They found rusted beams, half-buried antenna coils, and evidence of a bunker long since collapsed. But no signs of recent enemy activity. Still, Ruiz's radio pulsed with strange fluctuations. He swore he heard a voice whisper his name. When he looked up, the jungle stared back, quiet, still, waiting. We were trained for ambushes, landmines, traps, Ruiz said in a later interview. Not for something that didn't even leave footprints. Bravo Company made camp that night at the foot of the rise. The fire stayed low. Night fell early. And the jungle closed in. The jungle came alive at night, but not in the way soldiers expected. By 2100 hours, Bravo Company had settled into a loose perimeter around the remains of the old French outpost. No fires. Just whispers, low murmurs, and the soft buzz of failing radios. The air was heavy with moisture, and something else, something unseen, pressing down on their lungs. Private First Class Ruiz adjusted the dials on his pack again. The radio still pulsed with low static. He tried another channel. Then he heard it. A whisper. Not a sound. A voice. Not Vietnamese. Not English. Something else. Something breathy and knowing. It repeated a name, his name. He froze. Private Ruiz. Private Ruiz. The sound crawled through the headset like wind in a grave. Cut the radio, Sergeant Hayes barked from across the camp. We're getting cross signals. But Ruiz shook his head. This isn't cross signal. It's calling me. Around them, the jungle swayed though no wind blew. Tree branches shifted, casting long unnatural shadows. A few men joked nervously about Viet Cong psyops. Voice recordings. Propaganda tricks. But no one was laughing long. Corporal Eric Maddox reported his compass had stopped entirely. Not just spinning now, dead. He flipped it open, and the needle floated still as glass. Ruiz looked up again, eyes scanning the blackened tree line. Movement. Something tall shifted between the trees, too fast, too smooth. Not a man. Not a shadow. It didn't make a sound, but its presence left a strange echo in the air, like a pressure wave after an explosion. Specialist Carter clicked on his flashlight. For a second, nothing. Then the beam landed on a figure. It stood 30 meters away, half concealed by vines. No visible weapon. No uniform. It was tall, nearly 7 feet, and wrong. Its limbs were too long. Head tilted. No face. Just pale skin where features should be. As if it were shaped like a man, but built from memory. He blinked, and it was gone. Movement. Northeast quadrant. Carter shouted, rifle raised. Captain Merrill ordered the unit into full alert, sweeping lights and weapons outward. The jungle swallowed their beams like water. The trees themselves seemed to fold around the light. Then Private Jackson screamed. He pointed at a clearing just off the perimeter. Shapes, 3 or 4, dashed silently across it, too fast for eyes to follow. They didn't break twigs. They didn't leave footprints. They vanished. Ruiz's radio screamed. Not static, voices layered over each other. English, Vietnamese, and something else. Some words sounded like orders. Others, like weeping. One voice kept repeating a phrase. We are still here. The jungle snapped shut again. Silence. Just Ruiz, staring into the dark, his hands trembling over the radio controls. Captain Merrill called for radio silence, no more transmissions. They were spooking themselves, he insisted. But Ruiz knew what he'd heard. And he wasn't alone. It wasn't VC, he said much later. Whatever was out there, it knew our names. It knew our voices. It knew fear. As the night dragged on, sleep refused to come. Shadows kept shifting. A soldier reported someone whispering into his ear, but no one was there. Another claimed to see his deceased brother walking between trees. By 3 a.m., Bravo Company wasn't just on edge. They were unraveling. Whatever had found them in the jungle was not human. And it had just begun to play. At exactly 2 a.m., something broke the silence. Not a gunshot. Not a voice. A low pulse, like thunder underwater, rolled through the ground. Men stood. Weapons drawn. The jungle lit up for a second, not from their flashlights, but from within. The fog glowed faintly green, pulsing in sync with the strange vibration. Then came the scream. Private Maddox, positioned along the north perimeter, fired his entire magazine into the trees. The muzzle flashes revealed nothing. Just tangled vines and the suggestion of movement. He kept firing anyway. Contact! Contact! He shouted. Captain Merrill ordered flares. Red arcs hissed into the sky, briefly painting the canopy in bloodlight. And in those few burning seconds, Bravo Company saw them. Figures. Dozens. Flickering in and out between the trees. No eyes. No weapons. Some upright, some crouched. They did not advance, but watched. Their forms shimmered like heat waves. Soldiers opened fire anyway, rounds ripping through jungle. Leaves shredded. Bark exploded. Nothing fell. Ruiz screamed into his headset, Mayday, this is Bravo Company. We're under attack by unknown hostiles. Coordinates. But the radio replied in a voice that wasn't his own. You can't leave. It spoke calmly, as if reading a fact off a page. The transmission looped. Ruiz threw off the headset. Then all hell broke loose. Private Jackson vanished without a sound. One moment he was crouched beside Ruiz, the next, a blur, like gravity had swallowed him whole. His helmet clattered to the ground. Carter yelled as he saw another figure, a soldier from their unit, supposedly killed 2 weeks prior in an ambush, walking between the trees. No wounds. Just a blank stare and a slack jaw. Carter froze. The fog thickened. Sergeant Hayes tried to regroup the men, but half the unit scattered in panic. Some fled into the jungle, others stood frozen. Ruiz felt a searing cold pass through him, like a phantom moving directly through his chest. Then, through the trees, he saw it. A silhouette, impossibly tall, stood between 2 massive trunks. Its shape was all wrong. Angular shoulders, backward-jointed legs, a neck that twisted unnaturally as it moved. Eyes like coals flickered dimly from where a face might be. It didn't walk. It glided. And it was watching him. He raised his rifle and emptied the magazine. The rounds passed through. No reaction. It just tilted its head, like it was curious. I fired my whole clip, Specialist Carter later said. But it just stood there, staring. And then came the sounds, voices over the radio that shouldn't be there. Some were Bravo's own, caught in impossible loops. Others were women, children, people crying out from another time. A few spoke phrases in dead languages. And over all of it, a chant, low, inhuman, rhythmic. The same chant the radio had played when Merrill was found. "We are still here. We are still here." Panic overwhelmed training. The jungle became a maze of fog and firelight. Soldiers tripped, fell, disappeared. Shadows moved faster than light. Bullets echoed into nothing. Captain Merrill's voice cracked through the madness, "Hold the line. Regroup on the ridge." But by then, Bravo Company was no longer a company. It was fragments. Screams. Shadows. And somewhere in that chaos, something was watching and waiting. By dawn, the jungle was silent again. Birdsong never returned. The wind didn't stir. What was left of Bravo Company barely qualified as a unit. A few stragglers were found, one curled under a collapsed tree root, clutching his dog tags with bloody fingers. Another stumbled into the clearing, eyes glazed, mumbling a nursery rhyme none of them recognized. Captain John Merrill was found alone. He knelt at the edge of the collapsed French listening post, his uniform shredded, skin streaked with dirt and blood. His hands trembled around a radio, the same prototype long-range set Ruiz had used. But this one was different now. It was alive with noise. Not static. A chant. Looping, guttural, rhythmic. Not in any known language. When Hayes approached, it stopped. But when Merrill held it again, the chant resumed. He looked up slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, unfocused. His voice was a whisper. "They took them all. I saw it. I saw it crawl out of the trees. It wasn't human." Ruiz knelt beside him, but Merrill didn't react. His shadow, long and thin in the rising sunlight, stretched behind him unnaturally, like it didn't belong to him. It twitched, independent of the captain's movement. Ruiz blinked. The shape didn't. Hayes tried to pry the radio from Merrill's grip. The moment he did, the chant stopped, but the jungle seemed to sigh. As if something had been momentarily interrupted. Then Merrill began to hum the same chant. It was subtle, at first. Barely audible. But it was the exact cadence the radio had been playing. His mouth moved almost unconsciously, like the melody had embedded itself into his mind. Ruiz turned away to vomit. There were no bodies. Not one corpse from the men who had vanished. Just boots. Blood trails. Dog tags without owners. A few shattered weapons bent at impossible angles. And strange marks in the mud, deep claw-like gouges that didn't match any known animal. Ruiz swore the claw marks formed a symbol. A spiral or eye, half erased by the wind. The search team, flown in later that morning, stood in shock. One medic, after examining Merrill, refused to speak. Another man, a combat-hardened lieutenant, quit the army 6 months later without explanation. They sedated Merrill and airlifted him out by sling. As they lifted off, the radio, still in his lap, turned itself on again. The chant resumed, barely audible over the rotor blades. And this time, Hayes thought he heard his own name inside it. That was when he realized Merrill hadn't escaped. He had been left behind. But not in body, in mind. He wasn't Captain Merrill anymore, Hayes said later in a whisper. He was still wearing the uniform, but whatever made him John was gone. Left in that jungle. Or replaced. The rest of Bravo Company was declared missing. No one would say the word dead. Not without bodies. Hayes begged to lead another search mission. Request denied. Instead, an unmarked convoy arrived 3 hours later. Men in hazmat suits disembarked. They were not military police. No unit insignia. No names. They set up perimeters. Blocked radio access. And began burning everything. Gear. Packs. Dog tags. The radio. Everything except Merrill. Ruiz stood back and watched the flames. One soldier walked past him, face unreadable behind a sealed mask. "Forget this valley ever existed," the man said quietly. Then he was gone. And Bravo Company, officially, had never entered Shadow Valley. The helicopters came at noon. But they didn't bring medics or reinforcements. They brought containment. Hueys thundered over the tree line, rotors slicing through the humid air. Instead of relief, they carried men in sealed suits, gray, rubberized, faceless. No ranks. No patches. Just purpose. Some wore full respirators. Others carried flamethrowers. They didn't salute. They didn't ask questions. They just began the purge. The first order was clear: burn everything. Soldiers' gear was collected in silence: packs, rifles, radios, even uniforms. Dog tags were stripped from the few remaining men and tossed onto a pile. Captain Merrill's radio, which had continued playing its low, looping chant throughout the morning, was removed from the transport chopper and crushed beneath the heel of a steel boot. Then it was tossed into the flames. No one explained anything. Not to Sergeant Hayes. Not to Ruiz. When Hayes asked what the hell was going on, one of the hazmat-clad men replied flatly, "This didn't happen. You were never here." Hayes stared at him. "We lost 30 men. What do you mean it didn't happen?" The man leaned in, voice low. "Say another word, and you'll join them." By nightfall, the jungle clearing was scorched black. All physical evidence, burned or buried. Ruiz tried to salvage his map. It was marked in red ink with their route, last contact points, and the position of the listening post. He had hidden it inside his boot during the chaos. He kept it. That map would become the only physical trace that Bravo Company had ever entered Shadow Valley. Later that evening, Hayes and Ruiz were ordered onto a waiting transport. No debrief. No formal statements. Just silence. And NDAs. Dozens of pages. Legal threats. Prison time. Discharge. Families informed of logistical errors. The official record read: "Lost in action, presumed enemy contact." No enemies had ever been seen. No bodies ever recovered. No mention of Merrill's state. No mention of the radio. Just a quiet burial of everything. Hayes signed the paperwork, but not before memorizing every page. Ruiz did the same. As they lifted off, Ruiz looked out the window. The jungle stretched endlessly below. But where Shadow Valley had once been, the trees were blackened, and the mist rose heavier than before. And from far below, beneath the drone of the rotor blades, he thought he heard it again. The chant. It was softer now. Further away. But it was there. "We are still here." The sound followed them home. For years, neither man spoke publicly. Hayes was transferred, then quietly discharged. Ruiz resigned. Others who had been nearby during the recovery faded into obscurity, their records altered, their testimonies locked away. But rumors leaked. One soldier's sister claimed he returned from Vietnam changed. Never slept. Whispered to himself in a language no one could recognize. Took his own life in 1980. A nurse who treated Captain Merrill later claimed his vitals would spike at random hours, matching known seismic events in Vietnam's central region. She was fired after writing it into her report. Nothing about Bravo Company was ever acknowledged again. They burned everything, Hayes would say years later. Radios. Packs. Even dog tags. Like Bravo never existed. Like we never existed. But Ruiz still had the map. And he knew the valley hadn't been silenced. Only buried. The official story was airtight. According to Pentagon reports released later that year, Bravo Company was conducting a final sweep along the Cambodian border when they encountered a well-coordinated Viet Cong ambush. The terrain, they claimed, made recovery impossible. The jungle swallowed everything. Radio contact was lost due to environmental interference. End of file. No mention of the missing gear. No mention of Merrill. No mention of voices on the radio, or the inhuman figures, or the men who vanished without a trace. When Sergeant Hayes demanded clarification through his chain of command, he was denied access to the mission logs. His security clearance was quietly revoked. Within months, he was honorably discharged for psychological fatigue. Ruiz never even made it that far. His service record was altered to reflect reassignment away from Vietnam weeks before the incident. As far as the government was concerned, he had never even been in country. And yet, the silence was never complete. In 2023, 50 years later, a set of heavily redacted DARPA memos were leaked online through a whistleblower account. The documents referenced an experimental project known only as Project Echo Sight. The goal? To test long-range psychic communication technology in hostile environments, based on Cold War studies into non-localized consciousness. Shadow Valley, the documents revealed, had been chosen due to its anomalous EM profile and its proximity to local mythic zones. Buried deep in the memos was one disturbing phrase: known overlap between mental resonance and interdimensional phase bleed. Hostile feedback loops recorded. Repeat exposure not advised. The dates matched Bravo Company's mission. So did the coordinates. When the posts began circulating, they disappeared within hours. Accounts banned. Threads deleted. Screenshots scrambled by metadata corruption. But Hayes had already printed them. He recognized the language. The jargon. The pattern. It confirmed what he had suspected for decades. They hadn't just stumbled into something. They had been sent to test it. They called it a communications experiment, Hayes said in a private interview. But what were we communicating with? He tracked down a former DARPA contractor listed in one of the documents. The man refused to speak. Said his pension and safety depended on it. But just before slamming the door, he said one thing. It wasn't meant to open a door. Just listen through one. Hayes realized the truth then. The jungle hadn't attacked them. It had answered. Something was already there, waiting. Listening. And when those radios powered on, when Bravo's signals bounced through frequencies no human had ever touched, something answered back. And came through. That was what Merrill saw. That was what called Ruiz's name. And that was what still haunted Hayes. They said it was the jungle, he whispered. But jungles don't whisper your name. They don't take your voice and play it back at you in someone else's throat. He spent the next decade trying to speak out. Blogs. Underground interviews. Fringe conferences. Most dismissed him as another traumatized vet with hallucinations. But some listened. And some found the story too detailed, too aligned with known DARPA test zones, too consistent with other buried missions, ones never logged, only whispered. Hayes never stopped. He wasn't after revenge. He wanted truth. Because if it had happened once, it could happen again. And this time, no one would be able to say we didn't know. 50 years later, Sergeant Daniel Hayes still remembered the valley. He lived alone in a single-bedroom house at the edge of rural Pennsylvania. No neighbors. No family. Just a locked filing cabinet, a wall of maps, and a box of audio tapes he refused to throw away. In 2023, after the DARPA leaks broke online, Hayes agreed to a single recorded interview. The camera rolled in a dark, quiet room. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating a face that had aged too quickly. I've told this story 100 times, he said. To people who laughed. To people who nodded. But no one ever really listened. He reached for a battered leather pouch and pulled out the one thing the army never took from him. Ruiz's map. Faded. Blood-stained. Edges crumbling. It still bore the red pen marks from the original mission, coordinates, elevation lines, the last known position of Captain Merrill, and one word scrawled at the center of the valley in shaky handwriting. Opened. Hayes unfolded the map with care. His fingers brushed the dried blood near the corner. Ruiz said the valley wasn't natural, he muttered. He believed we stepped into something that didn't want us to leave. And I think it marked us. He paused. Eyes distant. Listening for something. Some nights, I hear it again. The chant. Faint, just outside the window. Sometimes I wake up and the radio, one I haven't touched in years, is on. Playing that same damn loop. The interviewer asked him if he thought it was real, or trauma. Guilt. Grief. Hayes didn't answer right away. He simply played a tape. Low static filtered through. A few seconds passed. Then, buried in the hiss, a voice. His voice. Calling out coordinates. A contact report. Then a long pause. And then, a second voice answered, slower, echoing the exact same words. Only, it wasn't his voice anymore. It was deeper. Wrong. Like someone trying to wear his voice like a mask. The interviewer recoiled. The air in the room thickened. Hayes just nodded. That's what the radios did, he said. They didn't just transmit. They listened. They repeated. And whatever was listening, it learned. He leaned forward. You think the jungle let us leave? No. It just sent us back to deliver the message. He tapped the table with one finger. They're not done with us. Hayes no longer slept with the lights off. His windows were boarded. No clocks in the house. No mirrors. Every so often, he would walk to the edge of the woods behind his home and just stand there, listening. Not for birds. Not for wind. For silence. That same dead, pressing silence from 1973. He didn't talk to Ruiz anymore. No one did. Ruiz had disappeared from public records after 1991. No family. No forwarding address. The map was all that remained of him. When asked why he still kept telling the story, Hayes stared at the camera. Because someone else is going to step into that valley, he said. Maybe not a soldier. Maybe a drone. A satellite. A journalist. And when they do, they need to know. He stopped. The shadows in the room seemed to grow. They're not alone. They never were. The interview ended. The tape was archived. A week later, the camera operator who shot it vanished on a hiking trip near Fort Polk. And the recording? The digital file became corrupted. Only the audio survived. And even that, sometimes changed. The valley is still there. Coordinates erased from maps. Trails rerouted. Officially, the region near the Cambodian border was cleared decades ago. Uninhabitable. Dangerous terrain. No strategic value. But satellite imagery tells a different story. A stretch of jungle where the canopy never thins. Where drones lose signal. Where explorers vanish. In 2022, a civilian drone enthusiast posted footage online. Grainy and brief, it showed a thermal imaging feed cutting out over a remote jungle sector. Before the screen went black, a single shape was seen, cold against the heat. A silhouette. Humanoid. Tall. Still. The clip was removed within hours. The account deleted. But not before a few frames were saved. And slowed down. In the last second, a red dot flickers across the tree line. An eye? A lens? No one could say. What made it worse was the audio. No MIC had been activated. Yet on the final frame, a sound. Faint. Static wrapped. A voice. We are still here. The chant again. 50 years later. Still echoing. Still listening. Today, that stretch of the Central Highlands is marked as a wildlife preservation zone. Entry is strictly forbidden by the Vietnamese government. Local patrols speak of malfunctioning radios and strange lights in the mist. Several disappearances have been attributed to animal attacks, though no remains have ever been recovered. But to those who know, the signs are all there. A door was opened in 1973. Not with explosives. Not with blood. With signal. With attention. And something came through. Something that watched men vanish one by one without a trace, and then let one walk away. Captain Merrill. Hayes. Ruiz. And maybe others who never spoke. Not to warn. But to witness. The jungle remains. Silent. Breathing. Waiting. That valley's alive, an old Montagnard elder once said in a Hush 2023 interview. And it's waiting for someone else to walk in. The Pentagon still refuses comment. The leaked DARPA documents are gone. And Bravo Company? Still officially listed as MIA. Still buried under decades of silence. But if you listen carefully, if you tune in just right, you might still hear the signal. And it might be calling your name.